Okay. We're on Chavches Amud Aleph, 28a, and we are towards the bottom. The line starts the word Eine Ba, and the fourth word is Gvia. Eine Ba Kikar. And then there's two.
About 9 lines or so, 3.
A little more. There's
nine from the bottom.
Yeah. I think there's a line which has
Eine Ba Zahav.
Eine Ba Kikar. So 2 lines on top of that.
Oh no, it's above it.
There's a line that starts with a little ches, or the one above that.
Oh no, so it's about 15 lines from the bottom.
Yeah. After the third word, you'll see 2 little alepphs.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, you got it?
15 lines from the bottom.
Eine Ba Chesed.
Eine Ba Kikar.
Kikar.
Got it?
And there's 2 little olives.
Yeah.
I got it.
Okay, so the Gemara introduced us to this verse, which puts different details of the menorah making, specifically here, the fact that it has to come from a talent. Sorry? The Gemara mentions different verse, raises the verse which gives us different details about the making of the menorah in relation to gold. Specifically, the one we talked about yesterday is the fact that the verse says it comes from kikar, comes from a talent of gold. And the Mishnah, therefore, the Mishnaic H text, the Brisa, therefore told us that if you're making it from gold, then it has to be a talent. The implication there, the reason why we brought this here is because it implies that there is the possibility of making it out of other metals. Right? And therefore, back to our original discussion, where we had the leeway in the verse which says, Te'asa Shoyi shall make it. And we were picking and choosing which one where should we give us our leeway? Should we give us the leeway? Should we allow ourselves the leeway to use other metals? Or should we allow ourselves to use the leeway of making it out of welded pieces of gold? And keeping the gold specific. And because of this derivation, which teaches us that specifically when you have gold, you have to use a talent, implying that there's a possibility of other metals. Therefore, the leeway comes to tell us other metals. Having raised this verse about details coming in conjunction with the word gold, and therefore only when you have gold do you need those details. But when you don't have gold, you don't need those details. The Gemara raises other such details as well.
Isn't that because gold was mentioned twice earlier in the double form? Or
so was the verse which told us it has to be carved out of one piece also came twice. So they kind of cancel each other out. It doesn't give one credit over the other, so to speak.
But it's crying out for interpretation because now it's
the Gemara is going through that now.
In a different
yeah.
way.
Yeah, so the Gemara is going through that now, and Tosfos actually goes through each detail of what the Gemara is picking and choosing to make each time the verse mentions these words
To give
meaning, to give some law that's derived from it. But I'm sticking away from it a little bit because as we'll see, I'll share with you in a minute, that it seems, at least when the Rambam rules, it's a little bit different than the way you would naturally read the Gemara. So it must be that the Rambam's learning the Gemara a little bit differently. So I'm just going to translate the Gemara as is, and I'll introduce you to what I'm telling you in a minute.
Yeah, because actually it's 5 times mentioned. There's that.
Well, besides for that, even the 2 times, look at this Tosfos here.
Yeah.
Even, right, the Rambam Paskin's not like that Tosfos. I'll explain in a minute.
But the Guitar to the Rambam is strange.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So there's obviously more than one way of learning this Gemara in terms of applying a talacha, but I'm just translating what the Gemara says literally so we can at least learn the Gemara itself. Okay. So the Gemara continues with details that are said with regard to the menorah in relation to gold, and therefore only when you have gold do you have those details. Namely, Gviya, Kaftera, Upracha. The knobs, the cups, the knobs, and the flowers. Mentioned yesterday that each of the branches of menorah were decorated with like engravings in the shape of a knob, in the shape of a flower, and then 3 cups. So those 3 details are also mentioned in the verse in the context of gold, and therefore the Gemara says the same teaching. Buzz of if you're if you're making the menorah out of gold, ba gvim, then you would make gvim, the cups, kafterdim, the knobs, uprachim, and the flowers. And if you're using other metals that's not gold, and ba gvim, kafterdim, uprachim, then you don't need to have the knobs, the cups, and the flowers. Okay. And this remains the halach actually. If you open the Rambam, it says that if you're using other metals, you don't have to make these details. Of course, it's better if you did, but the menorah is still valid if you didn't.
You don't need cups?
On the decoration. It's not cups. We're talking about decoration. We're not talking about the cups at the top which hold the lantern. Okay. These are decorative cups that are engraved onto the branches. 3 of them specifically. On the branches themselves, specifically
the
three.
branches, only the branches.
Each of the 7 branches have
Okay.
3 cups.
Don't we have a picture here?
In the book behind you, Yosef, there's or maybe not. Yeah, the one with the Mishkan, one that's called Mishkan.
Yeah, the brown book.
Yeah,
There's 2. One's Beit HaMikdash, one's
Yeah,
Mishkan.
there's 2, that's correct.
And let's see if I find it easily.
No, it's not. You can, I just go after the no, after the Aron.
After the orange, the next one.
And you'll have
No,
the
Shulchan, that's what I'm going
Shulchan
through.
and Menorah. It's in order. And that's
Menorah. Okay, so here they have the picture. If you can see it.
Yeah, the 2 versions.
So here there's 3 little cups, a knob, and flour. And actually, the truth is that the Rebbe points out that this picture is not perfectly accurate. The Rebbe demonstrates that in the Rambam's view, the cups were actually upside down. The cups were actually facing up or downward. Over here, they have the cups that decorate the menorah going facing up. The Rebbe points out from the Rambam that it's actually facing downward. Anyway, that's a detail. It's not related to our discussion here. Anyway, the point is that those three decorative pieces mentioned in the menorah are said in conjunction with the law, with the detail of gold, and therefore the Gemara says the same derivation we said yesterday. If you have gold, you make those decorative details. If you don't have gold, no decorative details are necessary to make it valid.
And the gold, you have to have a talent of gold.
Only if you're using gold.
Yeah.
If you're using other metals, then you don't need a talent.
Okay.
So that's where we're making these details contingent on whether you're using gold, because the verse puts them together. Again, this is all implication that we have leeway to use other metals. And then when you're using other metals, some of these details fall away. The details of the decorations and the detail of talent of gold. Now the Gemara now suggests maybe we should push this even further. The Manami, good morning. Perhaps we should suggest even more. Buzz of, if you're making the menorah out of gold, then ba'kanim. Then, consider. Then you should make branches of the menorah. The verse says you should make branches of your menorah. The verse says you should make branches of the menorah, 3 coming out of each side. And that verse, which tells you to have branches, also says the word gold. So maybe if you don't have gold, you don't need branches at all. In other words, if you're going to go with this detail, if you're going to go with this line of reasoning, then whenever the verse says the word gold in conjunction with a detail, and you don't have gold, that detail falls away, then maybe the detail of the branches also fall away. I'm not sure exactly how you would make a menorah that way, which is kind of the Gemara's answer. So Emanamim perhaps might say also ba'azav, if you have gold, ba'akanim, then you have the branches. Any ba'azav, if you don't have gold, any ba'akanim, you don't have branches, because the detail of branches is also mentioned in the verse in conjunction with gold. Says the Gemara, that can't be the case, because hahu pamit mikri. That would be called, pamit is like a lantern. It would be a lantern, not a menorah, not a candelabra. Mm-hmm. The verse says make a candelabra. Candelabra implies you have multiple branches that branch out, making your light. If you just had a stick with a bunch of lights attached to the sides without any branches coming out, then it would be like a lantern where you're holding one little light. Over here it happens to be 7 lights stacked on top of each other. But it wouldn't be a candelabra. And the verse clearly describes it as a candelabra. So we can't push the logic that far. Now the Gemara pushes the logic in a direction that you wouldn't imagine based on yesterday's discussion. And that was the little issue of contention I mentioned a little bit earlier. The Gemara now says like this. It quotes the verse which reads, V'zeh masa menorah. This is the workings of the menorah, of how the menorah should be made. Miksha zav. It's carved out of a block of gold. Right? So now the word miksha, which we mentioned yesterday, which is the word the Torah uses to tell you that it's hammered out, that it's carved as opposed to welded, is also said right before the word zav, gold. So following the logic we said till now, ba zav, if you're using gold, ba miksha, then it has to be one piece carved out of one piece. But in the ba zav, if you're not using gold,
mold and you pour
not gold, no, it has to be hacked down. For gold,
yeah.
We're just saying no, it has to be carved. Miksha means it's carved.
Out of one piece.
Carved, which means you take a big block of gold and you carve. You have an artist carve it out. Chiseled, yeah.
Scissors.
Sculpted.
Yeah.
But sculpted out of one piece, as opposed to like what you're describing, like in a mold. Not like that. Uh-huh. But the Gemara is saying like this: because the verse says this word miksha, which means it has to be carved out of one block, right before the word gold. So the Gemara is using the same logic. Buzz of, if you're using gold, mixture, then you have to hammer it out of one piece. Ain't a buzz of, if you're not using gold, ain't a mixture, you don't have to hammer it out of one piece. And the Gemara does not refute this. So even though yesterday we've been saying that gold is, we're giving you leeway, you can use other metals. But mixture, the fact that it has to be hedged out of one, hammered out of one piece, carved out of one block, no leeway. Right? That's the way we described the Gemara yesterday. Yeah. But here the Gemara is saying differently. So is the Gemara retracting? And it would seem from Tosfos that the Gemara is retracting. And therefore, according to Tosfos, the law remains that you actually have leeway on both. If you were using gold, then you have to stick to every single detail that the Torah says.
Why is this a difference between the Mishnaic age and the Gemara age on this issue?
Not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
Not necessarily. It's all Gemara age interpretation of Mishnaic age texts.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So Tosfos actually is of the view that the Gemara is giving us at the end of the whole discussion. He goes through the twice that it says gold, the twice that it says carved out, and applies it in a whole bunch of different ways using the last 10 lines of Gemara, and comes to the conclusion, based on what we just said here, that all the details that has to be carved out, that has to be a talent, that has to have these decorations of the knob, the flower, and the things, only when you have gold. But if you're using other metals, then it can be welded. It doesn't have to have those decorations. And it doesn't have to be made out of a talent. Certainly not. But the Rambam does not learn this way. The Rambam is clearly rules that the halacha is the way we learned yesterday. That it has to be carved out regardless of what metal. But you do have leeway as to which metal you want to choose. And if you're using some other metal, you don't have to have the decorations. But this detail that it has to be carved out remains eternal in the Rambam's view. So he must have some other way of learning the Gemara, and there are many commentaries that spend their time, or spend some time trying to understand how the Rambam understands this Gemara, because the Gemara seems to be retracting by saying that the carved out is contingent on the gold, just like the decorations are contingent on the gold, and just like a talent is contingent on gold. Clear? Mm-hmm. So that's why I said the Gemara is clear in translating the words, but how you would derive the halacha from the Gemara is not as clear as the translation of the Gemara on the simple sense. And it's just told you Tosfos and the Rambam would disagree as to what the halacha of this Gemara actually is.
It's also because the menorah of the Cheshmonayim, the first one, was made out of iron. It seems it was welded together from the pshat level.
It seems like it was welded together.
Yeah, it wasn't. It didn't have a time to.
Which raises the question why Rambam says
exactly.
that it has to be
carved
out even if it's another metal.
Right, that's what Tosfos more inclined.
So there's a historical question as opposed to just the not just the versus question, because there was a time when they actually welded it out of other metals.
They say some their spears with
Yeah.
swords.
So that Rambam is very he's very puzzling.
But to raise a question, Rambam.
That's what all the commentaries do. But
they don't come up with something conclusive.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, the only halachic authority that covers all laws, including the laws of the Beis Mikdash, is the Rambam. In other words, Tosfos doesn't have a comprehensive guideline how you make the menorah, how you make the temple. He just has commentaries on the Gemara. So if you went through all of his commentaries, you might come to some conclusion. But he doesn't have a code of Jewish laws. Here's how you make the temple. The only one who does have that is the Rambam. So he ends up being the forerunner in any given issue with respect to the laws of the temple. The Rambam is always the forerunner in terms of who. There are commentators on the Rambam that would disagree, who aren't necessarily always happy with what he says and try to work out what he meant. But at the end of the day, he still remains the cornerstone of any halachic ruling with respect to the temple, because he's the only one that has a comprehensive code of Jewish laws. And again, in this issue, it's contentious because he seems to be saying, or he does say clearly, that this law that it has to be carved remains universal even if you're using other metals. Whereas here, the Gemara clearly seems to be retracting yesterday's ruling and saying that the idea that it's carved out of one piece is contingent upon you using gold, just like the decoration is contingent on gold, and just like the talent is contingent on gold. And that's indeed the way Tosfos rules, but the Rambam does not rule that way.
What about Rabbi Akiva was not involved with the halacha? No.
Doesn't seem, maybe. Doesn't seem like it.
We don't have a record. We haven't even discussed it. We only go by what we have in the record.
Anyway, the Rambam and Tosfos come many years later, right? They're analyzing the text hundreds of years later. Okay. The Gemara now concludes this discussion by saying, Miksha de Seifa. The second time the verse says the word Miksha should be carved out, right? We had twice the word gold, and twice the word carved out, at least in the context of our discussion. So the second time the verse says it should be carved out, Lamai Asa, what's it coming to teach? You already know that it has to be carved out. So what's this last time coming to teach you? What's it coming to exclude? Carved out and not what? So says the Gemara, it's coming to exclude chatzaitzes are the trumpets that were made as part of the temple, as part of in this case the Mishkan, but then later the temple as well had trumpets which were blasted during various occasions, almost daily, actually daily, accompanying various different offerings and announcing different ceremonies with these trumpets. So it's coming to tell you that the trumpets don't need to be made out of
Gold.
one block. Right? We're talking about the verse which says
Gold, though?
silver. We'll see in a second.
Okay.
So the Gemara is going to tell us, why would I even think that the trumpets have to be carved out of one piece? Right? In other words, it's telling the Gemara is telling us that when the verse says that the menorah has to be made out of carved out of one block of metal, it's coming to exclude the trumpets. That the trumpets don't need to be carved out of one metal. Why would I think it should be carved out? That's what the Gemara is going to tell us now. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sorry?
Because it's not talking about the trumpets, it's talking
about the menorah. But somehow that excludes the trumpets.
Right,
Let's see how that works. So the Tanya, for we've learned in a Mishnaic H text, the verse says, sorry, there's no verse here. The Mishnaic H text says this: Chatzaitzos, the trumpets, hayubayim, they were made. They came in ha'asis, from that was already made. Like we explained before, ha'asis means carved out of one piece. Min ha'kesef, from gold, from silver. So they would take a block of silver and then carve out a trumpet. That's the way it was made. Asa min ha'gutayis, if it so happened to be that they made it out of scraps of metal that were welded together, kshedim, they're still kosher. But mishar min matachas, but if you made it from other metals, not silver, psulim, they're invalid. Now, this is exactly the reverse. When it came to the menorah, we gave leeway and said you could use other metals. And at least in the Rambam's view, you can't use, it always has to be carved out of one piece, whatever metal you're using. Whereas the trumpets is the reverse. It has to be made out of silver. You have no leeway with what kind of metal it is, but you have leeway that you could make it out of different parts. And that's derived from the menorah. How's that? Well, Ma'ishna, what's the difference between why are you picking and choosing? The Gemara is making this the same question we did yesterday with the menorah. Why are you picking and choosing that mishar min matachas? When it comes to the question of whether you're allowed to use other metals, psulim, we say it's forbidden. Why? It's not kosher. Why? Because the verse says kesef, that you have to make the trumpets out of silver. Vahavaya, and the verse says, and so it shall be. That is to say, it has to be specifically silver and not some other metal. So the Gemara asks, when it comes to the question of using scraps of metal, nami, likewise here too, miksha, the verse says it has to be carved out, meaning from one block. Vahavaya, and it also says, so it shall be. So why, when it comes to the metals, we say no leeway, and when it comes to scraps of metal welded together, we give you leeway when it comes to the trumpets? Says the Gemara, this we learn from the menorah. How so? Mi'it rachman agab menorah. The Torah excluded the trumpets when it spoke about the menorah. How so? Because the verse reads, Mikshahi, it is carved out of one piece. He v'loy chatzaitzes, it, and not the trumpets. So from the fact that the verse says another time by the menorah, and it shall be carved, it's telling you it shall be carved and not some other item. What's the other item that's not to be carved? The trumpets. Even though in best case scenario it should be carved, if you didn't carve it, it's still okay.
Just wait, so if the trumpets,
Clear?
if you did not carve it,
It's still okay. You use pieces of metal and welded it together, which is the more common way of making trumpets.
But it has to be silver.
Nobody buys blocks of silver and chisels out trumpets. If you're doing it for the temple, you might do that, but randomly, you weld it
More
together.
restrictive in one respect and less restrictive in another. More restrictive since it has to be silver.
Yeah.
As opposed to the other, but it can be.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah.
So let's say if we're going to go with Tosfos' view, which says that the menorah could be, first of all, from other metals, and it could be welded together, then the trumpets would be more strict. Because even according to Tosfos' view, you could not use other metals. Whereas in the Rambam, they just mirror each other.
Yeah.
Right? They're equally strict, they just mirror each other. When it comes to the menorah, we're leeway on the silver, strict on the carving, and the menorah and the trumpets are the reverse. We're strict on the silver, leeway on the carving. Whereas in Tosfos' view, we're leeway on the menorah on both, but on the trumpets, we're going to make you stick with the silver. So that's a good point. In Tosfos' view, the trumpets would be more strict. Clear? Okay. We have a few more minutes for Shabbos.
Shabbat Shalom.
Tanu Rabbanon.
Punish me, eh?
Our sages taught as follows. Kol HaKelim, all of the vessels, all of the objects of the temple, She'asa Moshe, that Moshe Rabbeinu made, Kshedim Loi, they're obviously permissible and kosher for him to use at his time, meaning in his generation, certainly, because God told him to make it. The Kshedim L'Doros, and the next generation after Moshe had passed can keep on using the stuff that he made.
Yeah.
Not same idea. The actual pieces he made, they can inherit it and keep on using it. It's not like when he died that they make new ones. In other words, because the reason why you might think the other way is because the verse says, I mentioned this yesterday, besides for the mitzvah of lighting the menorah, there's a mitzvah to make the menorah, and the mitzvah to make them as mizbeach, to make the altar, to make the pieces. Making of the pieces of the temple are an actual mitzvah. So you might think every generation they have to fulfill the mitzvah of making the menorah.
Yeah.
And you can't just inherit last year's one or the previous generation's one.
What they're doing.
So the Gemara is telling us, no, you don't. It doesn't have to be that way. The ones Moshe made, it's a one-time mitzvah. You've done it, it's done. So Moshe made the menorah, the mitzvah was done. Now they can just pass that from generation to generation. The same thing's true of everything else in the temple. You don't have to remake it every generation or every time a new kohen or some other time you have to make a new one. It can be inherited, with one exception. Says the Gemara. But chatzotzros. But when it comes to the trumpets, ksheres loi, they are permissible, they were valid for him, obviously, but absolus l'doros, it doesn't work for the next generation. So presumably, when Moshe passed and they went into Israel, and I guess it took 7 years, at least 7 years, because they fought wars for 7 years, till they settled the temple, the Mizbeach. Where did it first settle? In Yericho? Where was it first established? In Mishkan? The tabernacle in Israel. Where was his first stop? Before Shiloh.
Gilgal.
In Gilgal.
Yeah.
That's the first stop. Shiloh comes much later. Yeah. So when they established it there, presumably they had all the utensils that Moshe made, but they made new trumpets.
Make
New trumpets. Because the ones that Moshe made are only good for him.
What about the previous?
I don't know. It doesn't say what they did with them. I don't know.
Nothing?
I don't know. Says the Gemara, Chatzotzros, when it comes to the trumpets, my timer. What's the reason that we say that the trumpets that Moshe made work exclusively for him but don't work for the next generation? Why? Says the Gemara, Ilema, if you want to suggest that the reason why the trumpets are exclusively valid for Moshe but don't work for the next generation, because the verse states, Aseh lecha, make for you, God tells Moshe, lecha, make for you, v'lo l'doros, and not for the other generations. That's what you might think simply. Mm-hmm. Says the Gemara, Elamayafta, if that's the case, let's go through the entire description of God telling Moshe to build the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and every single time God says for you, it should be excluding the next generation. And is that the case? You just finished telling me it's only when it comes to the trumpets. And we have another one, Vasisa Lacha, Aaron 8. Make for yourself a wooden box. We're talking about the Ark of the Holy of Holies. It was made out of two layers of gold and one layer of wood. And when it comes to the making of the wood, God tells Moshe, make for you. So are you suggesting that you also have to make a new one when Moshe passes away? Clearly not. Hachanami, but in your logic, here too it should have said, L'cha, it's only for you, it's not the next generation. So seemingly, anytime the verse says for you, it should exclude its viability for the next generation. And the Gemara pushes even further. Now, the Gemara now introduces us to a discussion had elsewhere with respect to this word, when God tells Moshe for you, what it means, and see if that can help us. In the end, it doesn't help us, as we'll see. Ella rather, if we're going to go with the interpretation of the one who says that when the verse said, when God tells Moshe for you, Mishelcha, it means that it has to be made of your materials, then it doesn't exclude next generations. Right? Because it just means make it from your property, from your materials, from your money. But it doesn't exclude the next generation. Now, but if you're going to go with the other interpretation of the verse, which says that when God tells Moshe, for you, it's God's way of saying, kiviyachol, so to speak, I would have preferred your service, more than the service of the rest of the Jewish people, as if to say Moshe is this prize person, and God would have appreciated his service more than the other Jews. Either way, however you're going to interpret the word verse, the word you, whether the word you means it's got to be made from your property, or whether the word you means that God's telling Moshe, I like you more and I would have preferred just your service. Either way, it doesn't exclude the next generation. So Hainami, here too, here too, when the verse says make the trumpets for you, we need it to interpret one way or the other described above, but either way it doesn't exclude the next generation. And therefore we have to understand why when it comes to the trumpets, it does not, the ones that Moshe made do not get passed on to the next generation, whereas the rest of the stuff can get passed on to the next generation. And that the Gemara concludes as follows. Shiny Hassam, the case of the trumpets are different. Why? The Amar Kra, because the verse says, Lacha lacha, twice, it says twice, you. It says, Aseh lacha, make for you trumpets, V'hayu lacha, and it shall be for you. So first of all, you shall make it. That implies one or the other. Either that it should be your property, or that God would have likes yours better than everybody else. But the second time it says, V'hayu lacha, and it shall be for you, that tells you it shall be for you and not the next generation.
And there's
no other time where it has twice. And therefore, the trumpets cannot be passed on to the next generation, whereas the rest of the works can. It would be interesting to think about.
What you do with the trumpet?
I don't know. It would be interesting to think.
You burn it?
First of all, it should be interesting to think.
That's it?
Oh, maybe I'll have to make it usable.
I have no idea. It would be interesting to I'm opening the floor to this, to think about. Maybe we'll get to this on Monday. Why? What's the message therein? What's the Torah teaching us in telling you that the trumpets can't be passed on to the next generation, whereas everybody else can? What's unique about the trumpets?
leadership, maybe?
Maybe something like the trumpets.
Blow your own horn.
Yeah, in other words, that's what I'm thinking. Like the trumpets are kind of
The leadership.
the whole point of the trumpets was to announce the next service, to keep the schedule. So maybe it's kind of telling you got to take the reins in your own hand. Even if you're gonna, it's the symbol of.
Pass the torch.
Yeah, it's like it's the metaphorical torch, right? It's like
Context is each one is separate.
something like that. Maybe we'll get some more words for this on Monday, God willing.
The question is the double lacha. Why can't you say
Yeah.
for you yourself and for the next generation? Why do you have to interpret it the way you're suggesting?
No, then it would just say make it, without saying you at all. We just say make it, make a trumpet, make for you a trumpet. That's why it's open to interpretation.
No lacha. Okay.
It should have said no lacha, right? But so it says lacha a few times, and that's used for the discussion mentioned before, whether it's from your property or because God likes is better. But it says a second time for you by the trumpets, and that tells us that only Moshe's generation was allowed to use his trumpets, and the next generation had to make their own trumpets. Okay, have a wonderful Shabbos, everybody.